Triggernometry just released an interview with Stephen J. Shaw about why we should be having more kids, and this centers around global birth rate declines and the economic and demographic fallout from that. Now, there are a few things in the video which I think needed a bit of pushback and I think needed a different perspective being put forward. So let's have a look at the clip and then we'll get to that.
So you're talking about women awareness, and I'm broadening it. There's an anti-natalist message driving many things, and I've been, I've had it in my face more than once.
And we're talking about an anti-natalist message. I haven't seen it so much over here, but I've seen it certainly in the States, particularly in places like New York, where bringing children into the world is seen as an act of grotesque selfishness because, number one, the planet is already dying, is their narrative, and then you're just going to bring children in that's going to accelerate its demise. And also as well, I hear people going, well, the world is so terrible, why would I bring children into it? That is, that's awful, they're going to suffer.
So the first thing to say is that creating a child obviously does have a relatively large carbon footprint or environmental footprint. But I don't think this is actually the thing that we should be focusing on when we're talking about procreation and the environment. The thing I think we should be focusing on when it comes to this issue is not the fact that when you create a child, you're contributing further to environmental degradation, although that is a thing. It's that you're creating a child into a world where they're going to suffer from that environmental degradation. There's pollution, sea level rise, global warming, the increased likelihood of extreme weather events, all sorts of environmental disasters that are unfolding in front of our eyes and will continue to unfold, and yet we're creating a child into the world who didn't need to exist.
It's not as a long sort of cabinet full of potential ghost fetuses going, we want to be born, right?
We're bringing them into a world where even if you're skeptical of climate change and the magnitude of the disaster that it could be, even the fact that it could be a disaster is a reason not to create a child into that. When you have uncertainty as to whether you're going to be creating your child into a world where they can actually lead a reasonable life, which I don't even think in and of itself is a reason to create a child, surely when you're dealing with someone else's life, it is much better to be cautious when it comes to risks like this and not create them in the first place, especially given they're not going to exist to be losing out on anything. They're not going to care. The second thing that Francis says about the world being a generally terrible place and that the child is going to suffer is much the same. There are all sorts of horrors in this world, including abuse, poverty, all of the environmental disasters we've just spoken about, war, geopolitical uncertainty, cancer, dementia, all sorts of things that your child will then be vulnerable to once you've created them. Why would you create someone into that? And this gets us on to whether creating someone is a selfish act. Let's be honest, the reason people create a child is because they want to satisfy their own desires or the desires of others. They're not creating that child for the child's sake. The child doesn't exist to want to come into existence.
We want to be born, right?
So you're creating someone who doesn't want to come into existence in any way. You're doing it for your own desires, and by creating them, they're going to experience a serious amount of suffering. That does seem to have the characteristics of a selfish act. We can tell ourselves that it's not selfish because we're raising the child, we're giving them love, and we're giving them all sorts of resources so they can have a good life as possible, and all of that stuff is good to do, but it's simply fulfilling the obligation you created for yourself to the child when you created them. It's not like it's charity work. You created this person, you now have obligations towards them.
I get that. I get it in comments. I get it in attacks. I got it in a classroom, university classroom in Tokyo this year, doing a lecture to young Japanese students, when at the end, a British lecturer came in and sat at the back and then got up and started heckling me. Basically saying the things, why are you here talking to these young students? Why are you trying to tell them the environment's burning, the oceans are boiling, people shouldn't, and wouldn't let me speak. So these voices are there trying to, I think, poison young people's minds. I do think it's a poison, because why can we not at least talk about this topic? Why can we not debate this?
So the very first thing to say here is that preaching cautiousness when creating a child and really considering the moral implications of that, especially given the current situation with the environment or AI or geopolitics. That is not a poison. That is actually a sensible way of approaching the topic of whether to create a child or not. Now, Stephen here talks about an experience he's had where he felt like he was being shut down, and it sounds like he was being shut down by this person. And obviously that shouldn't happen. People should engage in debate, civil debate and discourse, not try and just simply shut each other down. Now, it's obviously regrettable that this happened to Stephen, but I don't think this should be some sort of generalization about the discourse in general. Stephen seems to suggest that you can't have a discussion about this topic, even though way earlier in the interview he talks about the fact that it is in the limelight now and in the media all the time.
So it was 2 years ago I was here, and at that time I would say fertility came into the mainstream press once or twice a year. I mean, it just wasn't a thing. US too. It's now almost daily. So the transition of awareness is the one big change I notice.
So this topic isn't being pushed to the side and kept down. Some of the richest and most powerful people in the world are talking about this message. So the idea that this is a topic that can't be spoken about is ludicrous, and I think Stephen is really over-egging the victim card here, even though I agree in that instance it wasn't good that that person was trying to shut him down.
To me, it's not an anti-child message. To me, it's an anti-human message. It's putting forward a narrative that human beings are evil and that we're a scourge on the planet.
Yeah. So, and where does that come from? Now, that's quite an extreme viewpoint, but it's there.
So this idea that humans are evil and a scourge on the planet, there are two things to say here. The first thing to say is that this cautiousness and hesitation around creating someone is not necessarily a misanthropic view about humanity. It might be a care for the person that you could create, a philanthropic view. That is not anti-human. If you're reserved when approaching a decision you've got to make that could impose serious harm, or will impose serious harm on an innocent individual, it's not anti-human to be reserved and consider both sides. The second thing here about humans being evil and a scourge on the planet, now there are people who do evil stuff and there are evil people, but we don't even need to get into the realm of calling humanity evil or humans evil or a scourge on the planet. We just need to think about the harm that humans do. And the average human does a lot more harm than we give credit for. So if someone like Francis just removes for a second this idea of humans being a scourge on the planet or evil or anything like that, just think about what would motivate someone to be misanthropic. Well, it's probably the fact that humans have this moral agency and the power to do really great stuff, and yet we time and time again engage in harming others out of choice or unfortunately as a result of the fact we're in a society that indoctrinates us to do so. And what I'm referring to here, primarily, most of the harm that the average person does is harm to non-human animals. The average person actively supports via their dollar or their pound systems like animal agriculture, which systematically breeds into existence billions of animals every year and often tortures them and then butchers them, and then people go on to eat and wear those animals. This happens to trillions of animals every year. That's animals we breed into existence and animals that we go out and kill that were born in the wild, like many fish. This is an insane level of harm that we're imposing on others for a sandwich. So you can have some sympathy for the people that become a bit misanthropic. And when I say misanthropic there, I don't mean hating every individual human as you come across them. You can like individual humans, or most of the humans you come across, as you find them in day-to-day life, but have this understanding that humans as a species cause a lot of harm and leave a lot wanting when it comes to our moral behavior, should we say.
There are some people who literally want humanity to die, and are happy to say it. Most of them don't say it, is what I figured out. Most of them know if they come out and say, I want humanity to die, a lot of people are going to switch off to that message.
So Stephen is talking about here a group of people that want humanity to die. Now, it's hard to know exactly what he means here because it's very ambiguous. Does he mean that there are people out there that want to kill off all humans, or are there people that want humans to become more moral beings, choose not to reproduce, and then humanity fades out. Because these are two very different things. One involves killing billions of people, probably in brutal ways because they're going to be resisting. The other is people choosing not to reproduce, so simply not having children, and as a result, humanity would go extinct. Now, obviously, neither of those things are going to happen in reality, and the killing off of people is obviously immoral, but the wanting humanity to die out, if you want to put it that way, via non-reproduction, well, Stephen would have to come up with an actual argument as to why he thinks that is a problematic view. And actually, that was one thing that was missing from the whole interview, was the moral side of things. What is the moral argument of creating new human beings so that they can serve existing human beings by helping them because these people are elderly and need support? And obviously those people should have our sympathy, but we should not have as a baseline creating new sentient beings into existence, whole new individuals, simply so they can serve the older generations and fix their problems. Individual sentient beings are not just tools for us to use whenever we have a problem. Anyway, I hope someday that Stephen and the guys at Triggernometry actually engage with moral antinatalist views at some point. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.